Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 680, and today's date is May 29th, 2015, and the title of this episode is De-Dollarization Continues, Russia Hints BRICS SWIFT Alternative Might Be in the Works. Now, before we get started, I just want to make an announcement. Tomorrow, Saturday, I'll be putting up an interview with Wolf Richter. He is the owner-creator of wolfstreet.com. If you're on the X22Report.com email alert system, you will get an email. If you subscribe to X22 Report Spotlight, you'll get an email from YouTube. If you are on none of these, you can just come to the X22Report.com site. You will see the interview on the right-hand side. Or you can just go to YouTube and type in X22 Report Spotlight, and it'll bring you right to the channel, and you can view it there. Next week, I have many more interviews coming up, and I'll let you know about each one of those when they are uploaded. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that Greece is completely falling apart, and we're starting to see that GDP in Greece is contracting. We see that they're entering a recession. I don't believe they've ever left the Depression. But of course, the corporate media is out there trying to spin this as, oh, they might be going into a recession. They've been in a depression with unemployment this high, with austerity and no production. They're in a depression. And we see as Greece sits here and tries to work with the ECB, the IMF, to come up with this deal, or maybe they're looking at Russia and BRICS, whatever they're doing, and taking their time, we see that Greece is falling apart. Right now, the deposits fell by 5 billion euros and now stand at 133 billion euros, the lowest level since September of 2004. Greek banks have now lost 32 billion euros in deposits since November and are losing another 160 million every day on average. And the IMF is saying, listen, we are not coming to any type of deal or an agreement until you make changes to your pension system, push austerity on your people, and come up with some type of budget. The ECB is doing basically the same exact thing. And we can see right now, it is really hurting Greece. And at this point in time, we don't know how they're going to come up with the next payment, or the payment after that, or the payment after that. Because as we know, they had to dip into the emergency SDRs from the IMF. They can't raise the revenue. They can't tap the pensions anymore. There's not much in the banks. So we're going to have to watch this situation very clearly. It looks like they're setting it up where Greece can exit the Eurozone and default. And it seems like it is heading in that direction. Now, here in the United States, we see something completely different. Everything is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with the economy. But we see more layoffs. JP Morgan Chase, they're going to let go 5,000 people. I mean, the cuts will amount to around 2% of the bank's total workforce over the course of the next 12 months. JP Morgan has trimmed its total headcount in 11 of the past 12 quarters. And every company is doing the same thing. They are trimming, getting rid of people. What kind of recovery is this if companies are continually laying off? Because if they're all continually laying off, where are these people going to find work? And this is the big question. They're going to have trouble finding work. They're going to get the part-time jobs. And a lot of these people will not be able to pay for their homes, their cars, pay for the student loans for their children. And it's going to put them in a bind. We see Steel Dynamics laying off 200 people. Gulf Marine Fabricators laying off 554. San Diego Union Tribune, 178. GDC Technics, 162. Again, we have to remember the United States government central bankers got rid of the reporting of layoffs back in 2013 because of budget cuts. We see consumer sentiment has dropped. Now, following the collapse in Gallup's consumer confidence and Bloomberg's consumer comfort, right now we see the UMich consumer sentiment has dropped from 88.8 to 84.2. But people are very nervous about the current conditions right now in the economy. And that fell from 107 to 100. This is the biggest plunge in current conditions since summer of 2011, when the U.S. was downgraded. And remember, they sued S&P for downgrading them? This is when people said, "Whoa, what is going on here?" And we can see the economy is not improving. It's getting worse. But of course, the government is out there, and they will fix it like they do with every statistical number. They'll manipulate it. They'll change it. And this is what happens every time the economy is not going the way they want. The U.S. economy suffered a quarterly contraction, with the first quarter GDP revised drastically down from 0.2% growth to negative 0.7%. Of course, that was the weather. But again, we're coming up to the second quarter. What are they going to blame it on? The warm weather? We had too much sun? It was too dry out? But they'll come up with something. Maybe they'll have a calculation in time where they can say, look, a positive 4%. They've done that before. Incidentally, there has not been a U.S. expansion with 3 negative quarters in it in the past 60 years. Basically, we could say welcome to the recession, or is this really a depression or a collapse? You choose the word you want to use. We know exactly where we're headed. We're headed towards a collapse. We see the corporate media mentioning the word recession, because how do you explain this anymore? With retail sales down, stores closing, housing bubble, student loan bubble, tech bubble, stock market bubble, derivative bubble. All of this has been pumped up by the central bank, not from the economy. The central bank created money that pumped up the economy. Didn't do anything for jobs, didn't do anything for manufacturing, didn't do anything to create and spur economic growth. It did everything for the bankers, for the government. It did nothing for the people. And the people are the backbone of the country. All the central bank did was create bubble after bubble after bubble. And we saw what happens when they do this back in 2001, back in 2008, all the way back in 1929. It happens every single time that bubble explodes and the economy comes crumbling down. This time, it is going to be much, much worse because the situation is that much worse. Goldman Sachs is out there and they're saying, you know, we might have too much debt and it threatens the world economy. They're telling us that the debt load of many countries is an economic risk. The aging population in developed world is going to put pressure on the economies. Goldman proposes creative social policy to deal with a looming crisis. Entire debt-based monetary system needs a reform. They're telling us we're coming up to the end game. That's what they're trying to tell us at this point in time. We see more bankers are killing themselves. A New Yorker walking by the Ocean Luxury rental apartment building at 1 West Street around 10:40 a.m. was greeted with a gruesome sight. A 20-year-old man had just jumped to his death from the 24th floor. He was an investment banker. I mean, right now I've lost count of how many bankers are committing suicide. When this market comes crashing down, there's going to be a lot more people jumping off roofs or out of windows. I mean, we saw that in 1929. Actually, we saw that in 2008. People did take their lives during that time period. We see Russia right now is pushing de-dollarization. Russia is ready to draft currency union with other members of the Eurasian Economic Union. More than 40 countries now have said they would like to boost trade with the EEU. India, China, Tunisia, Egypt, Israel, and many others have expressed interest in setting up free trade zones. Vietnam has formally signed the agreement to set up the free trade zone with the Eurasian Economic Union. The agreement became the first international document on free trade zone which they were signed, and they're going to put forth and go ahead with the free trade zone. They're moving forward, but the de-dollarization continues. We understand that Russia created their own alternative to the SWIFT system. And now they're saying, this alternative could be used with the BRICS. And right now, this SWIFT alternative would link 91 domestic banks to the Central Bank of Russia. On the one hand, the plan represented yet another move towards global de-dollarization, but on the other, was born out of necessity when Russia began to believe it may be expelled from the SWIFT system because of the Ukraine crisis. And then if we go back, I think it was 2 months, we received the word that Moscow received a seat on the SWIFT board because they realized that if they removed themselves and sanctioned Russia, they would lose billions upon billions of dollars. And they said, whoa, we can't go along with this. We can't lose this much money. So they decided to set up servers inside of Russia to say, listen, no, we're never going to do anything. We're setting up the payment processing inside your country, which is completely isolated from what's going on in the Western world. So we can see at this point in time, Russia is taking de-dollarization a step further by suggesting that a BRICS alternative to SWIFT may be in the cards. And I can see right now that most likely they will be doing this. I mean, look, the U.S. was supposed to vote in 2010 about giving more votes to the emerging markets. They didn't do it. They created the AIIB. And they're continually saying, you know something, we are going to do things without the private Western central bank countries. And they're moving forward on this. They're trading, not using the dollar. They're setting up bilateral trades with China using the yuan, renminbi. They're setting up hubs. Other countries are reducing the reserves of the dollar. The Middle East is falling apart. And once these people in Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq finally take their countries back, they will sell that oil not using the dollar. And guess what? All the other countries around the world will not need the dollar in reserves. They'll use the yuan. They'll use the ruble. They'll use whatever other currency there is. They won't need the dollar. And we can see this is what's coming. And this is why the U.S. and the central bank, which is one and the same at this point in time, they are fighting to keep this system propped up and to continually go about invading more countries to continually prop up the dollar. This is why they're trying to get into Syria. This is why they're going to Iran. Now, the Senate is going to be returning to Washington for the debate on the NSA surveillance extension. As we know, on May 31st, the NSA is due to expire at 12 a.m. And we can see right now they're pushing as hard as they possibly can to place an extension on it. Now, of course, the Patriot Act, Section 215, is completely in violation of the Fourth Amendment. But it seems like our government officials just don't care about it. The White House is putting pressure on the Senate to pass the legislation called the USA Freedom Act, which they're saying this will do away with all their surveillance. Well, to do away with it, all you have to do is not renew the Patriot Act, right? Why do they want the USA Freedom Act so badly? Because it doesn't do away with the spying. All it does is shift who's doing it. And they're shifting it to the corporations. And then the government will access that information from the corporations. So really, they're not going to stop the spying. They're just going to say, well, we're not doing it. We're looking at it. Well, again, it's in violation of the Fourth Amendment because they don't have a warrant to look at this information. But a lot of people think, oh, if they get rid of the Patriot Act and that expires, and the USA Freedom Act, if that doesn't get passed, the government's done spying on the American people. But guess what? They've been spying on the American people way before the Patriot Act. I mean, Diane Rourke, a congressional staffer in charge of overseeing the NSA for the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee, says the NSA's mass surveillance started by 1999 or earlier, but NSA hid it from Congress. Well, actually, it started much earlier than that. They just kept it a secret. The project was called Project Shamrock. Decades before 9/11 and the subsequent Bush order that directed the NSA to eavesdrop on every phone call, and again, they had that ready to go because they knew they were going to create this false flag with 9/11. And what happened was, with this Project Shamrock, they did the same thing as the Patriot Act, Section 215. But of course, going back in time, there was no internet, there was no email, there was no texting. There were phones. So they used that, and they also captured every single telegram that came into the U.S. and left the U.S. And it involved the accumulation of all telegraphic data entering and exiting. The Armed Forces Security Agency, AFSA, and its successor, NSA, were given direct access to daily microfilm copies of all incoming, ongoing, and transiting telegraphs via the Western Union and its associate RCA and ITT. Operation Shamrock lasted well into the 60s, when computerized operations Harvest made it possible to search for keywords rather than read through all communications. Project Shamrock became so successful in 1966, the NSA and CIA set up a front company in Lower Manhattan, where the offices of the telegraph companies were located under the code name LP Medley. And this whole thing about terrorism is fake, phony, and false. This has nothing to do with terrorism. Why were they spying back then? Nobody even heard of terrorism back then. Basically because they want to know what everyone is doing here in the country, where you're investing, who they can blackmail, who you're associated with. This is why they're keeping tabs on everyone. And now it's become so advanced, it's much easier for them to do this. And right now, the intelligence gathering is really about the executive branch not abiding by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. It's about the government ignoring the law. They're ignoring everything. They're violating everything, and they don't care. They keep this a secret. We have a government that spies on the American people. When they took office, they agreed that they were going to follow the Constitution and abide by the Bill of Rights. Because remember, on top it says, we the people. They broke the contract. Is this the government we want? No. They don't care about us whatsoever. The UN is out there, and they're saying data encryption. And remember, data encryption has been around for a very long time, and people have always used it. They're saying data encryption is essential to free speech, as it provides the privacy and security necessary in today's digital age. And this is coming from a new UN report. It calls on the U.S. Congress to prohibit Washington from requiring companies to provide backdoor access. Encryption and anonymity separately or together, create a zone of privacy to protect opinion and belief, says the report. The report, which will be presented to the UN Human Rights Council next month, comes as many governments' attempts to put backdoors in encryption software to assist law enforcement. And they've been doing this all along. They work with companies like Google, AT&T, Verizon, Microsoft, and many others to create backdoors where they can get in there and listen, read, whatever you're doing. And they bypass the encryption because they know the method and the key. This is why the FBI is out there saying we cannot allow the people to create their own encryption. Well, yeah, that's what you want to do. You want to create your own so they cannot access it. You don't give the government keys to your car or the keys to your home, do you? Why would you want to give them the key to all your private information? Because your private information is in your car, your private information is in your home, and your private information is in your messages, your texts, because you're corresponding with someone. You don't want everyone to read it. Or you put the government on there as a group text or a conference call if you wanted to include them, but you don't because you want it private. So we can see the government is not doing all of this for terrorism. They're doing it to spy on each and every one of us. We see the United States government out in Estonia, and most likely in every country they have an embassy in. They're spying on the citizens of Estonia, and right now, it's all the information out there is being collected by a secret division of the U.S. Embassy in the capital of Estonia. The Estonia media has reported this, and they're saying that the Estonia's Ministry of Interior knew about the practice and cooperated with U.S. intelligence agencies to go ahead and do this and spy on their own people. And we know this has been happening in Germany. We know it's happening in UK. We know it's happening in France. And basically we could say almost all the countries at this point in time. Now, the United States government is making a huge deal about the Spratly Islands, where China built their own island. It didn't exist before. They built their own island, and it's theirs. And they're out there saying, we have proof, we have photographic evidence. And I have to admit, this time, they finally gave a color picture, but they left it at a distance where you can't really make anything out. And I blew it up as far as I possibly can go. And they're trying to tell us that there's artillery on this island. I'm looking at it. It does not look like artillery whatsoever. They made it so small. And again, they're up to their old tricks, but this time they did use a color version of the satellite imagery or the spy plane imagery. But when you blow it up as close as possible, it doesn't look like it whatsoever. And we can see that China is out there saying we do not have weapons on this island. And even if we did, it's our islands. We can put it on our own territory. The thing that the United States government left out was they've done the same thing already, where they've built islands and they put weapons on there pointing towards China, where they've created and made agreements with other countries and created bases and placed missiles pointing towards China. In Japan, they want to move a base to a different location to bring in more sophisticated weapons, but the Japanese people are fighting back saying we don't want this. The U.S. has already done this, and there are many allied nations that have done this, and the U.S. has said nothing. They're making this a big deal on purpose. They're provoking China. And they're also doing this so they can beef up the entire area, because what we're seeing today is the Senate Armed Service Committee has added a China Sea initiative to the 2016 defense bill. All of a sudden, it popped in there because of what's happening on this island. How convenient! The legislation was drafted in part to address China's ongoing construction of artificial islands in the South China Sea as part of an ambitious land reclamation campaign. The NSC Chairman, Senator John McCain, inserted the initiative to offer support in the form of training and weapons to all the allied countries around China like Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and many others. This was done on purpose. This whole provoking, this whole propaganda series of events that we're seeing right now was done on purpose to bolster the defenses around China and to bring in defensive and offensive weapons in this area. That's it. That's what this is all about. While they're continually provoking China. Because eventually what they're going to do is provoke all these countries to start World War III, to cover up this major collapse. Now, out in Ukraine, we see the situation continually deteriorating. We see 80% of Ukrainians now live below the poverty line. The average wage is $50 a month. By UN standards, this is well below the poverty line of $5 a day. So the United States came in, had a coup d'etat, told the people that things are going to be fantastic. The country is in so much debt, the gold was stolen. The country is divided. The people are suffering. 80% of the Ukrainians are below the poverty line. Things are looking up. I mean, look what the United States, the EU has done to this country. And now they're selling it off bit by bit while pushing a new war. We see that Ukraine really has no real Ukraine military to speak of. And this is coming from Steinberg. This U.S. training program is more of a matter of showing the flag to support the government in Kiev. And again, we see how Kiev treats its soldiers. We see what they do. And the soldiers are not into this fight. Their heart is not into it. They don't want to fight their own people. They don't want to leave their families to go to war. But, of course, the U.S. government, the government of Ukraine, they don't care. They want the entire country back. This is what they paid for. Poroshenko is out there and he's saying Ukrainians who oppose NATO threaten Ukraine's security. If you're not with us, you're against us. Sounds like George W. Bush to me. Putin has been on the phone with President Hollande and Angela Merkel talking about how Ukraine continually shells civilians in the Donetsk area and Lugansk area. And he's very concerned, and he's reporting this now to both of these leaders of France and Germany. And we're going to have to see, because as we know, there are no penalties whatsoever for Ukraine if they continually fire upon the Donbass region. And he's letting them know that, yeah, this is still going on and we have proof. They're recording it every single time they're doing it. And what are you going to do about it? And of course, most likely they're going to do nothing about it. We see there's a report coming in from the Defense Ministry of the Donetsk People's Republic claiming that Kiev forces were preparing to use chemical weapons against the southeastern area. They're saying a week ago our intelligence saw 20 truck tanks with a capacity of 5 tons with an unknown chemical agent that arrived at the facility's territory. A group of U.S. military chemical experts had arrived in the southern city port of Mariupol to help them out. He says the U.S. military experts and Kiev authorities will prepare sabotage on Ukraine's territory with the aim of accusing the southeastern people of this chemical attack. It sounds like the same tactic they used against Assad in Syria. Now we're going to have to watch this situation very closely to see if this actually happens. But it seems like if it is, they're setting up the same exact false flag event that we see in Syria, with Assad using sarin gas, and it turned out to be the Free Syrian Army, where they're going to use a chemical attack in Mariupol, maybe Kiev, or wherever they want to do it, and blame it on the southeastern people, and the war is back on, because they can't just start the war. because they're in the middle of the Minsk II ceasefire. So they're going to have to use some type of false flag event to get it started. And they could be preparing a chemical attack, or it could be a dirty nuke. We have indication of that also occurring in this area. Moscow is concerned about NATO. They are now starting to practice on how to intercept Russian ballistic missiles. Why would they be doing this at this point in time? Unless they're preparing to go to war and to shoot down Russia's missiles. And this is why they are practicing. We see the Islamic State in the Middle East is saying that they've taken the civilian airport in Libya. The United States government, central bankers are doing whatever they possibly can to convince the world that they need to go in there, and to convince the American people they need that authorization for war passed. And every time they try to do it, the poll numbers, the American people are not with it whatsoever. And the only way to push this forward is to create an event that's so horrific that it moves the people to say, yes, now we need to go after the Islamic State. And this is what they've been preparing for, because every other tactic they've been trying has not been working. The White House is out there, and this is a strange statement coming from the White House, from the Obama administration. We won't rescue Iraq from the Islamic State. So they don't want to defeat the Islamic State in Iraq? Of course they don't. It's a proxy army for the US, Israel, UK. They don't want to destroy it. So the statement really isn't that strange. For those people who don't understand that the Islamic State is a proxy army for the US, that's a very strange statement. But it tells us their mission in Iraq is not to stop them. It's to resupply them, to go into Syria. Everything else that's happening in Iraq is the people. They are rising up and they want their country back. We see Colonel Gulmurad Kalimov, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, Kalimov, the commander of the Special Police Force. He announced on YouTube that he's now defecting to the Islamic State. He disappeared last month, only to reappear. He probably got more training from the CIA, Mossad, and other agencies to get ready to help out for some type of false flag event. Because his message is, listen, you American pigs, I've been 3 times to America, and I saw how you train fighters to kill Muslims. God willing, I will come with this weapon to your cities, your homes, and we will kill you. So you can see right now they're setting something up. We see North Korea, the propaganda is all over the place again. They're telling us that North Korea has been preparing for attacks on the US, cyber attacks, to demonstrate they have the capacity and the capability of waging cyber war. I mean, they are pushing the propaganda hard right now to push war. We see here in the United States, the FBI right now is calling upon all local law enforcement, New York Police Department and other law enforcement agencies across the country to help track the growing population of the Islamic State followers and homegrown terrorists, domestic terrorists. Now the question is, why are they doing this at this point in time? Well, we understand they've been nationalizing the police. They want the police to report back to who? The federal government. And now they're taking it a step further. They will all be working for the FBI, for the federal government. They'll be taking their orders to look out and get ready to stop and to report the homegrown terrorists. Those people who don't agree with the government. Those people who have different views. And they're ramping this up right now. There could be a false flag today in Phoenix. There's another anti-Muslim activist planning a Draw Muhammad cartoon contest, and it's happening in Phoenix today at 6 p.m. It's the same one that they did in Texas, and they're doing it right near a mosque. It's provoking. Of course, they're out there saying, well, this is about free speech. No, you can have the free speech, but it looks like you're really trying to provoke something. And I don't want them to stop, because they have every right to do this, but you can see their agenda. And if we see something occur, we know this is what they're doing. Even if it doesn't occur, they're pushing their agenda. And then they'll go to another city and another city. And eventually what will happen, they'll have enough cities right now where they'll say the Islamic State isn't in each one of these. You can see where all this is leading at this point in time. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.